She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a shop her family forgot existed. And inside that forgotten place, she learned the story she'd been told about her own life. Every word of it was a lie. The day I turned 18 was the day I became officially homeless. That's not the language they use, of course. They say aging out. They say transition. They say independence. They hand you a cardboard box stuffed with your files, a final check worth a few $100s that's supposed to bridge the gap until employment, and a handshake that feels less like a farewell and more like a push off a ledge. For 2 years, the state had served as my legal guardian, and on the morning of my birthday, it terminated the arrangement. I stood on the porch of the Northgate group home, the same porch where I'd arrived, a terrified 16-year-old gripping a backpack that contained everything she owned. Now I was a terrified 18-year-old gripping a cardboard box. The only difference was that no one stood on the other side of the door waiting for me. The air bit hard, a raw, wet cold that carried November's worst promises. It cut through my jacket, the one pulled from the donation closet, too wide across the shoulders, too short at the wrists. A flawless metaphor for every piece of my life inside the system. Nothing ever fit right. If you're hearing this and you know what it means to stand at a threshold like that, the past sealed behind you and nothing but fog stretching forward, then this story was made for you. Hit subscribe, because this is a place for people who had to build their own road home. My social worker, Mr. Henderson, sat waiting in his beige sedan. The engine idled with a kind of bureaucratic impatience. He was a decent man, as decent as anyone can be whose job is to manage the wreckage of broken lives on a government salary. His eyes carried a permanent exhaustion. A deep crease lived between his brows, like he was forever working a math problem that refused to balance. I was one of the unsolvable variables. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, zero, underscore, underscore. His voice was soft. I wasn't ready. I nodded anyway. I climbed into the passenger seat and set the box on my lap like a thin shield. The car smelled of cold coffee and government forms. That scent. It was the cologne of my entire adolescence. We drove without speaking. The wipers beat a slow, steady rhythm against the drizzle. Our destination was a state-subsidized apartment. One room, a kitchenette, mine for exactly 3 months. After that, the safety net vanished entirely. They called it a starting line. It felt like the edge of a drop. "There's one more thing," Mr. Henderson said, cutting through the quiet. He reached behind him and lifted a red metal toolbox. Dusty, dented, scratched across every surface like something that had survived a war. "This belonged to your father." My lungs stopped. My father. That word sat in my mouth like a ghost. He died just over 2 years before. A construction accident. They used the word sudden. His death was the event that had dropped me into the system. I became a piece of administrative wreckage. No other family existed, no aunts, no grandparents, no one at all. Just a photograph losing its color and a story I'd assembled from overheard whispers and blacked out case files. He was a good man, but troubled. Couldn't hold a job, drank too much, left me with nothing. That was the official narrative, the one handed to me like a fact. I took the toolbox from Mr. Henderson. It weighed more than I'd expected. "Is this it?" My voice came out thin. "This is everything?" He looked at me with that tired, apologetic expression. His landlord had kept it in storage. That's all they recovered. The rest of his belongings had been thrown away. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 5, underscore, underscore. I nodded, turned the cold metal box in my hands. It felt like a period at the end of a sentence. This was the total sum of a man's existence. A box of tools. My entire inheritance. He dropped me at the apartment building, a grim slab of concrete on the industrial edge of town. He carried my things up 3 flights. The room was small, scrubbed clean, and devastatingly empty. It reeked of fresh paint, the cheap kind. "I'll check in with you in a few days," he said from the doorway. "There's a property matter connected to your father, just a formality." I had no idea what that meant. I was too hollowed out to ask. I thanked him, then he left. The door latched shut and silence filled that room like floodwater. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in my life. I was 18 years old. I was free. And I was completely, devastatingly alone. I left the toolbox by the door. I couldn't bring myself to open it. A monument to abandonment. A rusty red testament to the man who left me nothing but the shape of his absence. 3 days passed and I did nothing with them. I sat on that thin mattress, watching rain slide down glass, watching the street glisten like something wounded. Saltines and tap water. The future stretched out gray and formless, an ocean with no shore, no oar, no reason to row. Numbness had become its own kind of shield. Then the fourth day broke something loose. A stubborn flicker of curiosity ignited in the hollow where feeling used to live. The box. I needed to know. I dragged the toolbox to the center of the room and flipped the two metal latches. They snapped open, sharp, decisive. The top tray held exactly what you'd expect. Screwdrivers with worn wooden grips. A hammer, heavy, its claw chipped. Pliers and wrenches. Mismatched sockets rattling in a cracked plastic case. They carried the smell of oil and iron and something deeper. Sawdust. My father had carried that scent on his skin. I lifted the tray free. Beneath it, resting alone at the bottom, was a single object, not a tool, a key. Long, forged from dark iron, heavy in a way that demanded attention. Its head was shaped like an ornate clover. Its bit was complex, toothed, deliberate. Rust covered parts of it, deep blood orange that crumbled onto my fingertips. This key didn't belong to a car or a front door or some cheap padlock. It belonged to another century, the kind of key that unlocks vaults or secrets. Pressed beside it lay a small piece of paper, yellowed and folded into a tight square. My fingers shook as I opened it. Written in neat, compact handwriting I half recognized as my father's. An address. Not one I knew. A part of the city I'd never even heard of. Just a street name. A number. Nothing else. No explanation. No farewell. A key and an address. A question mark left behind by a ghost. I sat on that floor with the key pressing cold and heavy into my palm, the scrap of paper beside me like a dare. For the first time in 2 years, the numbness pulled back. What replaced it had no clean name. Hope laced with dread. The key was an invitation, a loose thread dangling from the neat story I'd been told about my life. And something settled deep in my bones. A certainty I couldn't argue with. I had to pull that thread. I had to find what door this key opened. The phone rang the next morning, shrill, aggressive, bouncing off bare walls. Mr. Henderson. His voice had changed. The gentle sympathy from before was gone, replaced by clipboard efficiency. Maya, good morning. I'm calling about your father's estate, as I mentioned. Time to settle it. I sat up, my pulse quickened. His estate? I thought the toolbox was everything. Legally, no, he said. There's a property. A commercial storefront registered under his name. Old North Quarter. The issue is, the city has it classified as derelict. He was years behind on property taxes. There's a significant lien against it. Papers shuffled on his end. Look, the city is willing to forgive a portion of the back taxes if the property sells to a designated developer revitalizing that area. They've made an offer. After liens and fees, you'd walk away with roughly $5,000. Clean break. $5,000. Might as well have been $1 million. A ticket out. A fresh start in some other place. The smart move. The easy move. What if I don't want to sell? The question left my mouth before I understood it was coming. Silence stretched across the line. Maya, he said, voice softening, sliding back into that tired father register. I've seen the file. The building is a shell. Hasn't been occupied in years. Inspection report says the roof is failing. Water damage throughout. It's a money pit, a liability. Taking the cash is the sensible thing to do. It's what anyone would advise. What anyone would advise. Those words hung there, vibrating. The system had been advising me my entire life, advising me to stay quiet, stay compliant, don't make waves. Accept the story handed to me and don't ask questions. But I had a key in my pocket now, heavy, iron, a contradiction to every piece of advice I'd ever been given. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 16, underscore, underscore. My voice didn't waver. He sighed. Long, deep. The sound of a man who'd watched too many people choose the hard road. I said again, and this time my voice carried something I barely recognized. Steel. He gave me the address. It was the same one. The exact same address scrawled on that yellowed scrap of paper from the toolbox. A current shot through my body. Faint, electric, undeniable. This was no accident. This was a thread pulling me somewhere specific. I told him, I didn't let him finish. It's mine, isn't it? I have every legal right to see my own property. Silence on the line. I'd pinned him with his own framework, his own bureaucratic logic. Quote 23. He said, dragging the word like it weighed something. Quote 24. After the call ended, I stood motionless in the center of that bare room, thoughts firing in every direction. The easy money, the clean exit. It sang to me, a melody promising safety, predictability, a quiet shore where nothing would ever hurt again. Sign the papers, cash the check, vanish, seal the past in a container, same as my father's tools, and let the earth swallow it. But what if the past refused burial? What if it had been waiting, patient, deliberate, to be found? I pulled out the thin fold of cash from the state, transitional funds, meant for groceries, bus fare to interviews. I counted it slowly. Not much. On the cheap state-issued smartphone, I looked up the address. 2 hours by bus. A trek across the entire city to a grid of streets that appeared on the map like an afterthought. Forgotten. Irrelevant. The choice felt like standing at the edge of a high board. I could retreat, climb down the ladder to solid ground, to the $5,000, to the reasonable path forward. Or I could jump, throw myself into water whose depth I couldn't guess, whose bottom I couldn't see. I pulled on my too large jacket, slid the iron key into my pocket where it pressed, heavy, undeniable, against my thigh. And I walked out. The bus ride peeled the city apart in layers. First the grim utility of my neighborhood, then the polished glass towers of downtown reflecting wealth like mirrors. Then the wide suburban streets with their trimmed hedges and painted mailboxes. And then, out the other side, the city started unraveling. Buildings aged before my eyes, streets narrowed. The franchise signs and espresso bars dissolved into small independent shops with sun-bleached awnings and prices written by hand on cardboard. It felt like moving backward through decades. The bus groaned to a halt beside a rusted pole. North Quarter, the driver announced, eyes fixed ahead. I was the only passenger who stood. The doors opened, and I stepped onto fractured sidewalk. The bus exhaled behind me and pulled away, and then silence. Deep, heavy silence broken only by wind threading between buildings. The sky hung low and gray. The air tasted damp, mineral, like the inside of a cellar. Brick buildings rose 2 and 3 stories on either side, their faces worn soft by 100 years of rain and indifference. Some had boards nailed across their windows, blank, hollow stares. Others clung to life, a barber shop with a pole that had stopped turning, a small grocery displaying dusty cans behind smudged glass, a laundromat murmuring to itself in the quiet. And there, squeezed between the laundromat and a building wrapped in curling plywood, stood the address. Narrower than its neighbors, its brick darker, stained almost black with soot. The ground floor display window had gone opaque beneath years of filth. Green paint on the door and frames had blistered away in patches, exposing pale, rotting wood underneath. A sign dangled crooked above the entrance. I squinted, made out the faint skeleton of a word. Repairs. It looked exactly the way Mr. Henderson described. Abandoned. Hollow. A waste of a trip. My chest tightened. Maybe he'd been right all along. Maybe this was stupidity dressed up as courage. I nearly turned around. Could have walked straight back to the bus stop, ridden home to that empty room, dialed Henderson's number. Could have taken the 5,000. Could have been smart. But my hand was already deep in my pocket, fingers locked around cold, dense iron. I'd crossed the city to stand here. I had to know. One stone step up to the front door. A massive black iron lock was set into the wood just below the handle. Rusted, ancient, same vintage as the key itself. My hand shook as I raised it, aligned the teeth with that complex keyhole. The key slid in. For one suspended moment, nothing. I held my breath, waiting for the jam, the refusal, the dead end. Then I turned it. Metal shrieked against metal, a horrible grinding protest, a sound like ripping through a century of silence. Then a deep, solid thunk, the bolt sliding back inside the frame. It worked! The key actually worked! I stepped back, my heart was hammering. The door stood unlocked before me. The story wasn't finished. It was only now beginning. My hand hovered over the brass doorknob, cold metal, worn glassy smooth by 1,000 palms before mine. What was I doing here? Trespassing in some condemned building? But you're not trespassing when you hold the key. And this wasn't some random structure, it was mine. A fierce, fragile sense of ownership flared in my chest. This decaying place on North Elm Street was the only thing in this world that belonged to me. I drew a breath, damp air flooding my lungs, and pushed. The door groaned, its bottom edge dragging against the floor, but it gave way. It opened into darkness. Not total black, but a deep and dusty twilight. One brilliant lance of sunlight cut through the gloom from a crack in the boarded windows. It caught a swirling universe of dust. Stepping inside felt like entering a photograph, a moment sealed in amber. The air hung thick and motionless, carrying a scent I couldn't immediately name. Old wood, yes, dry dust. But beneath that, something else entirely. A faint metallic bite like a machine shop, a rich organic warmth like aged leather, a sharp cleanliness, oil and solvent, the smell of labor, of creation. I let the heavy door swing closed behind me with a muffled thud. Near darkness swallowed me again. Then slowly, gradually, shapes began separating themselves from shadow. A long, narrow room. The front half was a shop, a counter running along one wall, shelves climbing to a pressed tin ceiling high above. Every surface lay draped in white cotton dust cloths. The room looked haunted by ghosts, lumpy, shapeless forms, silent, patient. I moved deeper, my footsteps obscenely loud against wide plank floorboards. I reached for one of the cloths, heavy, stiff with years. I pinched a corner between thumb and finger and pulled. It tore away softly, releasing a fresh explosion of dust that seized my throat. Underneath, a glass display case. And inside, resting on faded velvet trays, were watches. Not modern digital things, old mechanical ones. Pocket watches in ornate silver cases etched with scrollwork. Wristwatches on cracked leather bands. Their faces, miniature universes of tiny gears, jeweled movements and delicate subdials. Every single one frozen at a different hour. I pulled another cloth from a section of shelving. More watches, clocks, strange, beautiful objects I had no names for. Music boxes with inlaid wooden lids. Brass barometers with ornamental faces. A ship's chronometer suspended in a gimbaled wooden case. A treasure vault of forgotten craftsmanship. Things built by hand with patience, with devotion. This wasn't merely a shop. It was a museum of precision, a cathedral of skill. The back half told a different story. A heavy wooden workbench sat beneath the largest window, glass so thick with grime it admitted only a sliver of gray. Above it, tools hung in precise rows on a pegboard wall. Tiny screwdrivers with color-coded handles, brass hammers, files in every conceivable shape, dozens of tweezers and pliers, each finer than the last. And on the bench itself, work laid out as if the craftsman had simply stood up and walked away minutes ago. A half-disassembled pocket watch rested on a small leather mat. Its impossibly tiny screws lined up in perfect order. A jeweler's loop sat beside it, lens aimed at the ceiling. Wonder and unease hit me simultaneously. Who was this person? Who had worked in this place? My father. The thought arrived as a whisper, but it collided with everything I'd been told. The drinker, the drifter, the man who couldn't hold down work for more than a week. That man could not have inhabited this space. This room was about order, patience, extraordinary skill. This was where a master had practiced his craft. I ran my fingertips along the workbench edge, wood polished dark and smooth by oil and decades of use. He had stood exactly here. His hands had lifted these tools. A wave of dizziness struck so hard I gripped the bench to stay upright. It was too much at once. The story I'd carried my whole life was fracturing, falling to pieces around me. I needed to sit. There was a wooden stool shoved beneath the bench, and I dragged it out. As I did, my knuckles caught something. A small metal handle hidden under the overhang of the workbench. A drawer, so precisely built that its seams vanished into the wood grain. I pulled it open, silent, smooth. No tools inside, paper, notebooks crammed with that same tight, careful handwriting from the scrap. And resting in the center of the drawer, a gray metal lockbox, shoebox sized. Not locked. I lifted the lid. My breath stopped dead. A thick stack of envelopes, dozens, bound together with a length of old twine. On the top envelope, written in that exact, precise script, my name, Maya. Beneath the letters sat a small portable cassette player, the kind people used 20 years back. One tape already loaded inside. The label, handwritten, bore a single word: listen. I lowered myself onto the stool, the box balanced on my knees. The shop's silence wrapped around me like a fist. Dust motes floated through the single blade of light. Everything had funneled toward this: the key, the door, the shop. This box, these letters, this tape. The mystery's beating heart was right here, sitting in my palms. And I was paralyzed. What if the truth cut deeper than the story I already knew? What if it confirmed the thing I feared most, that he left me because he didn't care? But what if it didn't? What if it shattered everything I thought I understood? I looked around the silent workshop, its tools hanging patient on their hooks. This place already knew the answer. These walls had held the secret for years. It was time I held it too. I pulled the twine loose. Before I tell you what those letters contain, I need to stop for a moment. If this story is landing somewhere real for you, if you've ever felt like you were peeling back a hidden piece of your own history, a truth somebody buried, tell me in the comments. This community we're building is for people who know the past doesn't stay buried. You're not alone in this. All right, back to it. I sat on that dusty stool, the stack of letters spread across my lap, and I couldn't draw a full breath. My hands trembled so violently I could barely grip the first envelope. Every one of them addressed to me. In my father's handwriting, dated. The first, almost 2 years old, written just weeks after he died, or weeks after I was told he died. I had to choose, letters or tape, written word or spoken one. I chose the tape. I needed his voice. I needed that raw, human thread before I could face ink on paper. My fingers fumbled across the cheap plastic buttons. Play, eject, fast forward, rewind, stop. I pressed play. A soft hiss, magnetic tape spinning against the heads. Then a voice. Maya, hesitant, rough, so full of love and pain it hit me like something physical. His voice. I remembered it from when I was very small. Low, a comforting rumble beneath everything. Hearing it now felt like touching a live wire. If you're hearing this, it means two things. It means I'm gone, and it means you found your way here. I knew you would. You were always my clever girl. A sob tore through my chest. Hot, sharp, impossible to contain. I pressed my palm hard against my mouth. I have so much to explain, the voice continued, and not enough time. The letters will tell you everything. The whole ugly, complicated story. But I need you to hear this from me first. I need you to know I never abandoned you. Not for a second. A shaky breath on the recording, the creak of a chair, a faint echo off close walls. He was here. He sat in this room when he spoke these words. Everything I did from the moment your mother got sick was to protect you. Putting you in the system, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Felt like sawing off my own arm. But I had no choice. There were bad people, Maya. People I owed money to. Money I borrowed trying to save your mom. When she passed, they came for me. Dangerous people. I couldn't let them anywhere near you. So I made myself vanish from your life, so they could never use you to reach me. My eyes closed. Tears ran freely, dropping onto the dust-covered floor. The story I had carried for years, that crushing weight of being unwanted, of being discarded, was fracturing apart. It wasn't abandonment, it was protection, a desperate, brutal act of love. This voice continued, gentler now. He cleared his throat, and the sound was thick, waterlogged with feeling. The tape hissed for several seconds. He said, barely a whisper now, another pause. He sighed. The tape player clicked. The hiss died. The message was finished. The silence that flooded back was different now, not empty, full. Full of his voice, his love, his sacrifice. I sat there a long time, letting the truth drape over me like something heavy and warm. My entire world had been rewritten by a 10-minute cassette tape. My father wasn't a villain. He was a hero. Flawed, desperate, tragic. A man who had surrendered everything for me. I finally turned to the letters. Open the first one, dated just after I'd been taken into care. Quote, 39, quote. It began. Quote, 40. Quote, I read for hours. Letter after letter, a secret history of the last 2 years of my life unfolded before me. He wrote about his nights in the shop, the intricate watches passing through his hands, the slow, grinding process of paying down his debt. He wrote about me. He'd followed me from a distance. He knew when I'd been moved from the foster home to the group home. He wrote, quote, 41. It was the record of a hidden life, a father's love persisting in shadow. He documented every dollar earned, every dollar paid toward what he owed, and every dollar saved for me. The final letter was different. The handwriting, rushed, unsteady. They know. Someone talked. They're coming. I don't have much time. The tape is in the box. The key is in the toolbox. You'll know what to do. I love you. I have always loved you. Be brave, my clever girl. Your father. The letter slipped from my fingers. My hands were numb. It wasn't a construction accident. He was murdered. He knew death was coming, and his last thoughts were of me, of making sure I'd find my way here. The grief struck like a physical force, a tidal wave that crushed the air from my lungs. I doubled over, pressing the letters against my chest, and I wept. I cried for the father I never got to know, for the years stolen from us, for his sacrifice, the terrible, beautiful weight of a love I'd never been allowed to feel. And when the tears finally drained away, something new rose in its place, hardening in my chest like cooling steel, rage, and beneath the rage, determination. He had left me a choice, the easy road or the hard one, run or stay and fight. I looked down at my hands, my mother's hands, he'd said. Steady. I dropped to my knees, tears falling onto the dusty floorboards, and began searching for the loose board. The planks were wide and dark with age, worn smooth along the paths between the door, the counter, and the workbench. My fingers traced the rough grain of the wood, searching for that subtle give beneath the surface. Third from the wall. He'd said, third from the wall. I counted, 1, 2, 3. This plank looked identical to every other, same weathered face, same worn edges. But when I pressed down on one side, it shifted, no nail holding it. I worked my fingernails into the seam and pulled. The board came up with a low groan, and beneath it, a dark, hollow pocket. Cool, dry air drifted up from the gap. I reached into that darkness. My fingers found something wrapped in oilcloth, heavy, rectangular. I brought it out and unwrapped it on the floor. 2 items inside. The first, a thick manila envelope. I tore it open. Documents. A property deed in his name. Unencumbered. Free and clear. Beneath it, the original bill of sale dated 40 years back, bearing my grandfather's name. My family had held this place for 2 generations. This wasn't just my father's shop. This was my inheritance. A lineage carved into walls and floorboards and time itself. Tucked alongside the deed sat the title to a small, banged-up pickup truck stored in a rented garage a few blocks away. 6 months of storage paid in advance. The second item was a plain metal cash box. It had weight to it. I pried it open. The air left my lungs. Stacks of cash. 20s, 50s, hundreds. Each bundle wrapped tight with rubber bands, lined up in neat rows. Not a fortune, but more money than I had ever held, ever touched, ever stood this close to. Every bill represented a night he sat alone at that bench. Every stack was his love compressed into paper, sacrifice made tangible. A folded note rested on top. His final words to me, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 43, underscore, underscore. I sank back on my heels, cash box in my lap, deed in my hand. The choice wasn't abstract anymore. It was sitting right here in my palms. The easy road stretched out before me. Clean, straight, obvious. Take this money. Go find Mr. Henderson. Sign the sale papers on the building. Add that $5,000 to this stack and vanish. College, travel, a small apartment in some quiet, nameless town. I could scrub away 18 years and emerge as someone new, someone unburdened, someone without a history trailing behind her like chains. The pull of it was almost physical, warm and heavy, like sinking into sleep after days of waking. The relief of surrender, the mercy of not having to fight anymore, of accepting the path already laid out. Who could blame me? I thought of the group home. The fluorescent indifference, the sensation of being a case number in a manila folder, the looks that carried pity like a disease. I could shed all of it, permanently. The rage and grief from before had burned down to ash, and what remained was vast and hollow. Exhaustion, the kind that settles into bone, into marrow. Maybe walking away was the answer. Maybe the fight belonged to people who still had something left to burn. I set the money and the deed on the workbench beside the half-finished watch. That tiny mechanism, gears and springs suspended mid-motion. An intricate machine waiting for hands steady enough to wake it. I studied the tools arranged along the wall, each one placed with deliberate care. The notebooks stacked beneath, filled with my father's patient script, diagrams of escapements, calculations for balance wheels. This had been his world, the world he'd built for me to step into. Could I really turn away from it? Let some developer gut the walls, pour concrete over his legacy, erect something hollow and gleaming where his life had been. Could I let his story, his real story, be buried under asphalt and forgotten? A buzz from my pocket jolted me upright. The sound felt obscene in this space, an intrusion into something sacred. I pulled out the phone. Unknown number on the screen. My thumb hovered. I nearly let it ring out. But something pushed me to answer. Hello, is this Maya Lane? A man's voice, polished, assured. The kind of voice accustomed to hearing yes. I managed, barely a whisper. Silence from my end. Sterling Development. The name alone felt cold, industrial. He continued, his tone dropping, softer now, familiar, as though we'd known each other for years. I know about the city's offer sitting on the table. That's just a formality. We can move this along quickly. Cash in your pocket before the week is out. A clean slate. You don't want some crumbling relic in a neighborhood like this dragging you down. It's dead weight. We're throwing you a lifeline. Dead weight. He called my father's legacy dead weight. The hollow feeling inside me evaporated, burned away by a white-hot rush of protective rage. This man, with his polished tongue and his easy check, wanted to purchase my father's sacrifice and flip it for profit. He wanted to pave over my history. I was there that night, an old man from the block had told me once, his voice barely above a snarl. I saw everything. This wasn't part of the plan, this memory, this voice, but it surfaced unbidden, a fragment of overheard conversation, a piece of something I hadn't known I was assembling. The official story said he fell. The whisper said he was pushed. This developer, this corporation, were they part of it? Was their revitalization scheme the reason my father became inconvenient? The easy wrong wasn't just signing over a building. It was letting them win, letting them walk away clean. I said, the word came out quiet, but it felt like thunder in that room. Abernathy said, annoyance sharpening his tone. I repeated, louder now, my voice steady with a certainty I hadn't known I possessed. The property is not for sale. Now, wait a minute, kid. Let's be rational here. We are being rational, I said. The word we felt strange and enormous on my tongue. It was me and my father. Me and my grandfather. The shop is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Do not call this number again. I ended the call before he could get another word out. I stood there, heart slamming against my ribs, breath coming in ragged bursts. The fear remained, a cold fist in my gut. But something else lived alongside it now. Something that felt like power, like purpose. I looked at the money on the bench. It wasn't a bus ticket anymore. It was a war chest. I looked at the deed, not a liability, a declaration. I picked up the phone again, scrolled through my contacts until I found the number. Pressed call. 58, he answered, voice flat. 59, I said. 60. I drew a long breath, eyes sweeping the dusty, silent shop. My shop. I said. A long, stunned silence filled the line. I could picture him perfectly. Mr. Henderson at his cluttered desk, fingers pressing the bridge of his nose, that deep crease between his brows carving itself deeper. He said at last, his voice thick with exhausted pity. I said, the words tasted like iron and conviction. He pushed back, frustration climbing into his voice. I said quietly. Another pause. Different from the first. This one carried weight, consideration. When he spoke again, the frustration had dissolved into something reluctant, a grudging respect. He said, I asked. A sigh came through the phone, long and heavy, the sound of a man who understood he was about to shoulder work far beyond his paycheck. He said half to himself. I asked. After the call ended, pure terror crashed over me like ice water. What had I just done? I had turned down a fortune, what felt like a fortune to someone like me, and chained myself to an impossible task. The weight of it hit me all at once. Dust everywhere, filth coating every surface, that heavy accusatory silence, the sheer enormity of what had fallen apart. Henderson had been right all along. This was delusion. I was an idiot. I dropped onto the stool, buried my face in my hands. That defiant fire from the phone call, gone. Nothing left but the bitter residue of doubt. I was nobody. An orphan clutching a box of old tools, pockets stuffed with ghosts. What made me think I could pull this off? Then my gaze landed on the workbench, the half-assembled watch, the notebooks dense with my father's careful, unhurried handwriting. Leo Lane had stared down gangsters. He'd labored in secret for years, all of it for this place, all of it for me. He never quit, never ran, he worked. I got to my feet. The first step was obvious. Clean. I found a broom in a back closet, bristles splayed and worn to nothing. Starting from the rear of the workshop, I began to sweep. Dust lay inches deep in places, a soft gray shroud draped over everything. And as I swept, the floor began to tell its story. Dark oil stains, a galaxy of tiny gouges from dropped instruments, the faint ghost outline of a chair that had stood in one spot for decades. Every stroke of that broom was an act of repossession. I wasn't just cleaning a floor, I was stripping away years of abandonment, of silence. I was carving out room for something new. The whole day disappeared into it, bag after bag filled with dust and wreckage. I found old rags, discovered a tap in the back that, against all reason, still ran, and started scrubbing grime from the windows with a bucket of cloudy water. When the first pane came clear, a thin rectangle of pale afternoon light spilled across the workshop floor. First new light to touch this room in years. It felt sacred. The labor was brutal, physical, and deeply good. Every muscle screamed. My hands were cracked and raw. But for the first time in my entire life, I felt genuinely powerful. This wasn't the quiet surrender of Northgate. This was creation. Nobody was doing something to me. I was doing something. The weeks that followed became a blur. True to his word, Mr. Henderson connected me with a lawyer, a young, serious woman named Sarah, who specialized in exactly this kind of tangled, impossible-looking case. She met me at the shop, her sturdy boots tapping against the freshly swept concrete, her eyes cataloging every detail. Quote 79, she asked, leaning toward a display case. Quote 80, I said. Quote 81. She studied me. Then the stacks of paperwork, the deed, the tax notices. Quote 82. Quote, she said, pushing up her sleeves. Quote 83. Quote, days dissolved into phone calls in city offices. We negotiated with the tax assessor, hammered out a payment plan I could barely sustain. The first installment swallowed a massive portion of the cash my father had left behind. But when Sarah handed over that cashier's check, she smiled. Your current, she said. Liens lifted. The city can't touch it now. First real victory. Then came the inspections. The building inspector was a stone-faced man who eyed the peeling paint and water-stained ceiling with open suspicion. He moved through the space of the clipboard, each notation landing like a verdict. Faulty wiring, fire hazard, roof needs full replacement, patching won't cut it, plumbing's out of code. I trailed behind him, heart dropping with every new sentence. At the end, he turned to face me, expression unreadable. It's a lot of work, kid, he said. A whole lot. I know, I managed, barely a whisper, but I can do it. He held my gaze for a long moment, sharp eyes moving from the clean floor to the clear windows to the set of my jaw. A sigh. Then the click of his pen against the clipboard. I'll issue a temporary certificate of occupancy, he said, eyes on his paperwork. Condition being, you get a licensed electrician in here within 30 days to draft a rewiring plan, and a roofer for an estimate. Don't make me regret this. Not a yes, not a no, a crack in the door. The electrician and the roofer were a mountain unto themselves. Their estimates were staggering, far beyond whatever cash remained. I sat at the workbench that night staring at the numbers and felt reality collapse on me all over again. The money was draining away. The problems dwarfed anything I could handle alone. The fantasy was finished. I was going to fail. I was going to lose this place, exactly the way Henderson said I would. I pressed my forehead into that worn wood, my father's workbench, and for the first time since discovering this place, I felt completely beaten. Sitting there in the dark, skin against the cool grain, despair rolled through me like a tide. Those estimate numbers read like a verdict. Too massive, too impossible. I'd been so foolish, so reckless in my certainty. I'd stood up to the system, hung up on the developer, planted my flag. But a flag doesn't pay for anything. You need money, you need skills, you need people. I was running dry on all three. I thought about my father. Had this same crushing weight pressed down on him? He'd stared down loan sharks, labored in secret, lived an entire hidden life. My troubles, a leaking roof, ancient wiring, seemed trivial next to his. Yet they felt every bit as impossible. I was ready to surrender, pack a bag, walk away from all of it. Then I heard a gentle tapping on the front window. I raised my head. Through the freshly cleaned glass, a silhouette stood against the glow of streetlights. An old man, leaning on a cane. I half recognized him, a regular from the laundromat next door. I cracked the door open. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 93, underscore, underscore, I said, the words feeling odd on my tongue. The old man smiled, eyes crinkling, warm and unhurried. Quote, 94, he said, voice like gravel wrapped in kindness. Quote, 95. He lifted his cane toward the shop interior. Quote, 96, quote, he said. Quote, 97, quote. The air left my lungs. Quote, 98, quote. Quote, 99, quote, he said, gaze drifting somewhere distant. Quote, 100, quote. Arthur's eyes settled back on me, steady and kind. I own the laundromat next door. I see the electrician's truck pulling up, the roofer's van. I hear them too, sucking their teeth, throwing numbers at you designed to make you quit. It worked, I admitted, voice thick. Then stop asking people who want to scare you, he said plainly. Find ones who want to build. He aimed his cane down the block. The barber shop. Go see Marco. His brother's an electrician, honest, skilled. The grocery on the corner. Maria's cousin does roofing. Good work, fair price. All you have to do is ask. This neighborhood looks after its own. I stood there. No words came. Something fragile stirred in my chest. Not quite hope, but its ghost. Why? I managed. Why would you help me? The warmth left Arthur's face. What replaced it was gravity. He said. He turned and shuffled back toward his laundromat. His words hung in the still air of the street long after he vanished. The next morning, I did exactly what he told me. Stomach knotted with nerves, I pushed through the barbershop door. The place was empty, just one man in a white coat sweeping hair off the floor. I said. He glanced up. A grin crept slowly across his face. I steadied myself, then everything spilled out. The impossible estimates, the 30-day deadline. Marco listened without interrupting, then reached for an old rotary phone and dialed. Rapid-fire Italian poured out of him, hands cutting the air. When he set the receiver down, he looked at me. Gianni pulled up in a dented van, hand-painted on the side. He was loud, cheerful, trailing the scent of garlic and solder. He walked the shop whistling low, tugging wires, scribbling notes, __quote, _116, ___, he announced with a theatrical sigh. Quote, 117. His quote still stung, but it was a third of what the first crew wanted. And he added with a wink, quote, 118. Same story with the roofer, Maria's cousin. He scaled that roof, came back down streaked with tar and filth, and quoted me a patch job that would hold a few years. Long enough for me to save for a full replacement. Your father, he said, dragging a rag across his blackened hands. He repaired a music box for my daughter once. Wouldn't take a dime. Said it was a beautiful machine that deserved to sing again. Time we returned that kindness. Slowly, one small miracle at a time, the impossible bent toward possible. A community I never knew existed began closing ranks around me. Gianni and his apprentices rewired the main service panel. Bright, steady, safe light flooding the workshop for the first time in years. The roofer sealed the leaks, halting the slow rot. Arthur left a cup of coffee on my doorstep every single morning. Maria from the grocery dropped off sandwiches and wouldn't hear of payment. I was still alone, but I wasn't lonely anymore. Days I spent cleaning. Nights I spent studying. I consumed my father's notebooks like scripture. They were his true legacy. Not the money, not the building, but the knowledge. He had documented everything. The delicate art of escapement repair, the complex mathematics of gear ratios, how to mix your own shellac, how to blue steel hands over an alcohol flame, a language I couldn't yet speak, but I was determined to learn. I started simple, a cheap broken clock from a thrift store. Following my father's diagrams, I dismantled it, cleaned every gear, every spring, reassembled it, nothing, took it apart again, and again. On the fifth attempt, after hours of grinding frustration, as I nudged a tiny wheel into position with a pair of tweezers, I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible. Tick, then again. Tick. It was alive. That sound was a symphony. I pressed the clock against my ear, tears of joy and exhaustion rolling down my face. I had fixed something, taken something broken and made it whole, found the right touch. The shop was transforming, no longer a dusty tomb. It was clean, bright, organized. I had arranged my own small workspace on the big bench, my father's tools laid out beside mine. His presence still filled the room, but it had shifted, no longer a haunting, a comfort, a quiet encouragement. I was building a new life, not on the ruins of my past, but on its foundation. The day the sign went up changed everything. It wasn't fancy. I'd found an old piece of wood out back and painted it myself, using the lettering from one of my father's notebooks as a guide. It read simply, __quote _121 __. I hung it from the old bracket above the door, the same spot the original sign once lived. As I tightened the last bolt, a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk below. Arthur beaming, Marco and Gianni on break from their own shops, Maria wiping her hands on her apron. They clapped. A small, quiet ovation. It meant the world to me. I had a name. I had a trade. I had a community. I unlocked the door and flipped the little cardboard sign in the window from underscore underscore quote underscore 122 underscore underscore to underscore underscore quote underscore 123 underscore underscore. The brass bell above the door, polished just that morning, stayed silent. For hours I sat at the workbench, stomach in knots, pretending to oil a set of screwdrivers. What if nobody came? What if this whole thing was an expensive, foolish dream? What if my father's talent hadn't passed down to me? Maybe I was just a girl playing dress up in her dead father's workshop. Mid-afternoon, the bell jingled. My heart jumped into my throat. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, clutching a small velvet pouch. "Are you open?" she asked, tentative. "Yes," I managed, barely above a squeak. I cleared my throat. "Yes, we are." She approached the counter carefully, as though not quite believing it was real. "I saw the sign," she said. "Lane, Leo Lane fixed my husband's pocket watch years ago.